what we're going to do is look at the speeches of Job and his friends to each other. If you've ever looked at the book of Job, you know that the vast majority of the material has to do with these, they're called cycles of speeches. The three friends speak by turns to Job. He responds to each one. And then there's a concluding section by Job, and then it starts over again, another cycle. The three friends speak to Job, and Job responds, and there's a concluding section, then a third cycle. The three friends speak by turns to Job, and he responds. It can be frustrating to read through all of that without some perspective, without some sense of what actually goes on in your life. If you've ever had a situation, a difficult one, you can remember perhaps processing that with a family member, with a friend, over and over and over again. Don't look at me so innocently. Come on now. And pretty soon they're saying, oh, look at the time. They're trying to, avoid talking to you because you are hurting. You're still hurting, and you want someone to help you work through it so you can come to some kind of resolution. However, we have this phrase in our language, don't be a Job's friend, for a reason. The friends were, it would be hard-pressed to define friend here because they say a lot of horrific things to him. And they did it thinking that they were trying to help him. So I wanted to pull out some highlights from that, or lowlights, as you'll see as we look at it, and try to learn something about that. The way that we, in our culture, learn about how to socialize and how to respond to people is just simply doing it, or as I said last week, eavesdropping. We hear somebody say this or somebody say that, and we learn phrases, we learn how to approach, we learn nuance and how to deal with folks. Sometimes we learn the wrong things. As I'll point out tonight as we go through this, some of the same things I have either had said to me or I've heard people say to others that we're going to hear the friends say to Job. All right, so you have the outline there, and if I can get the next slide to come up, we're going to see the first cycle of speeches. Is it that small? Oh, there we go. Oh, good. The three friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. So the first speech to Job from Eliphaz is this. You see it? Can you read it? Yes. A word was secretly brought to me, my ears caught a whisper of it. Amid disquieting dreams of the night, when deep sleep falls on people, fear and trembling seized me and made all my bones shake. A spirit, a spirit glided past my face, and the hair on my body stood on end. It stopped, but I could not tell what it was. A form stood before my eyes, and I heard a hushed voice. Can a mortal be more righteous than God? Can even a strong man be more pure than his maker? He's relating the spiritual experience that he's had and trying to apply that to Job's situation. It doesn't apply. He is simply trying to impress Job with his spirituality. You can see what he said. What in the world does that have to do in terms of comfort or in terms of answer or anything to Job's situation? He hasn't truly appreciated what Job has gone through. When I first went to Southeastern in 1979, Lori, I think, were you there in 1981? Is that when you came? Lori came in 1981. Can you believe that's how long ago? I had her no, she's shushing me. Oh, okay. In those days, she might remember what went on in the dorms where they couldn't go off campus. There's everything, a real strict campus, right? So they would prophesy to each other and give spiritual words to each other. And I can't count how many times some distraught student would come running to me in my office and say, so-and-so told me that God told him or her I was supposed to go to deepest, darkest Africa to be a missionary, and I don't feel that at all. So they were so distraught, trying to live off somebody else's spiritual experience. Have you seen or heard about that before? And so instead of helping the poor student, it just confused and frightened and upset them. In a similar kind of way, here Eliphaz is coming with this spiritual experience that really doesn't apply. Why are you saying this to me? Are you trying to say I'm not spiritual, or it doesn't make any sense, really, when you look at it. Then in the second cycle of speeches, it's the next slide, you see, he is responding to Job's objection to the first speech by saying, would a wise person answer with empty notions or fill their belly with hot east wind? He's talking about Job. One thing I can tell you with confidence, please don't insult the people you're trying to help. It's going to get worse as the speeches go along, but I think we can take that home with us. Don't insult somebody you're trying to help. Would they argue with useless words, with speeches that have no value? But you even undermine piety and hinder devotion to God. Your sin, how do they know? Your sin, what? Later we're going to see, in just a minute, Eliphaz is so convinced Job is in sin, he will invent sins he thinks he's guilty of. Pretty pathetic, right? Some of you older might have been in the movement, the Pentecostal movement or charismatic movement for some time. Do you remember the Happy Hunters? Anybody remember the Happy Hunters ministry? I used to call them the Happy Heretics at Southeastern because of all of the falsehoods that they boldly proclaimed. And as part of what they did was they would come in and claim to cast demons out of people and heal them, but they published a book in which they listed these ailments and would name the causes for it, and if you did this, then you would be healed. So if you have arthritis, it's because you have a bitter spirit. And so they would come and cast out a bitter spirit out of you so it'd cure you from arthritis. Assuming just because you have a particular ailment that you have this. So I wish we could say Eliphaz's attitude had dissipated through the years, but it's still with us. There are people who make assumptions about what's going on by our condition without really knowing us and what's really going on in our lives. There was a provost at Evangel College University years ago when my wife was there in the 70s. His name was Zenas Bickett. His wife, a godly woman, was crippled horribly with rheumatoid arthritis in a wheelchair. The most wonderful, pleasant woman. She would take her gnarled hands in braces and lay them on people, and people would be healed. Now, according to the Happy Hunters, she had a spirit of bitterness. Do you see what's wrong with this picture? How can you make assumptions about people based on what you think? Okay, let's move then to the third speech of Eliphaz, and this is the part where he invents sins. Is not your wickedness great? Are not your sins endless? You demand security from your relatives for no reason. You stripped people for their clothing, leaving them naked. You gave no water to the weary. You withheld food from the hungry. Though you're a powerful man, owning land, an honored man, living on it, and yet you sent widows away empty-handed. Wow, goodness gracious. That Job's an awful guy. Do you remember God's testimony about Job? Have you considered my servant Job? Fears God. His life is blameless. Here's Eliphaz. Broke the strength of fatherless. That's why snares are all around you, why sudden peril terrifies you, why it's so dark you cannot see, and why a flood of water covers you. Come on. Really? Aren't we supposed to think the best of folks and try to help as best we can? We're eavesdropping on this and we're learning, wait a minute, that's wrong. That's so wrong. We can't do this to people already in misery and then make them feel even worse. So then we move then to another Job's friend. We say that with sarcasm, of course. Bildad. So the next slide, we'll see Bildad's first speech to Job is he blames the children. When your children sinned against God, he gave them over to the penalty of their sin. Now you have to remember in chapter 1, when each of the kids met for a party at one of the other kids' birthday, they had a party for their birthday. It says it in chapter 1. Job was so worried about them, he said, just in case somebody's committed a sin, he offered sacrifice after each one of those. So Job, is making sure things are right with the kids as well. But here's Bildad again, assuming that, well, we have to blame somebody, so let's blame the children. Then in the second speech, he's describing Job. Job has no offspring or descendants among his people. Well, yeah, he lost his kids, true. No survivor once he lived. People of the West are appalled. Those of the East are seized with horror. Such is the dwelling of an evil man, he's talking about Job. Such is the place of the one who does not know God. And again, I remind you, God knows Job. Even says twice in chapters 1 and 2, have you considered my servant Job? And then his third speech, he uses Psalm 8. If you see that in Job 25 and compare that with Psalm 8, you'll see that he is trying to use Psalm 8 as a way to argue that Job's suffering has to do with his immorality and his frailty. It's heartbreaking to read these. The last one, though, if you thought the others were bad, the last one, Zophar's, this is the next slide, is the worst. In Zophar's first speech to Job, he is especially vicious. He says, know this, you're so bad, God has even forgotten some of your sin. You're so sinful. And even worse than that, in the same chapter, he calls him a jackass. Do you see it? The witless, referring to Job, can no more become wise than a wild donkey's colt can be born a human. You see what I mean about it keeps getting worse. Then in his second speech, he's describing Job again. Since the time humans came to the earth, the mirth, that is the joy, the happiness of the wicked is brief, talking about Job, and the joy of the godless lasts but a moment. And then finally, in his third speech, he repeats the same theme, the swift divine judgment of the wicked, of course, referring again to Job. So in all of these speeches to Job, all three friends have basically made him feel worse, forced him to defend himself, And in between, he'll also address God in a way, let's be honest, that is accusatory. He's accusing God of abandoning him. Let's not paint Job with a perfect picture here. He's struggling too with his faith, but I want you to get something here. He is being influenced by the attitude of his friends, so that in some sense, even though he's defending himself, in some sense, he might be starting to believe them. When someone's in the darkest time of his or her life, and you come along, it will have an enormous influence on how they respond by how you respond to what is going on in their life. Do you come along with loving presence? Do you come along with accusations? Do you come along with what? How you respond to them will have a huge impact on the way they in turn respond. Even though they may not recognize it, after a while you'll begin to notice, oh, maybe I should change, or thank God I was able to do this or that for that person. So you can see as you read through Job's responses and then his addresses to God, how he has been influenced by his friends in the wrong way, So it's not surprising to us in the next slide, and I'm just summarizing his response. He says these similar kinds of things in other speeches. Notice how he responds in chapter 6. Does a wild donkey bray when it has grass, or an ox bellow when it has fodder? He's saying by that rhetorical question, I'm hurting. You shouldn't be surprised that I'm complaining. I'm not complaining for no reason. There's a reason why I'm feeling and saying the things that I'm saying. Then in chapter 6, 14 and 15, your heart has to break when you read this. You see there on the screen, anyone who withholds kindness from a friend forsakes the fear of God. But my brothers are as undependable as intermittent streams. Someone that you thought you could count on turned out to be someone that was a betrayer, who you felt was a traitor to you. Any of you had that experience? You know how deeply the hurt can be in your heart, especially when you were counting on that person in your roughest time. And so he says in chapter 6, 24 and 25 to his friends, teach me. I'll be quiet. Show me where I have been wrong. Well, that's what Eliphaz, we've already read. Eliphaz, I'll show you. Here are all the things that you did. Well, but it's a lie. He didn't do those things. How painful are honest words, but what do your arguments prove? Again, your heart almost breaks with Job, who has gone through the most horrific situation, losing his family, losing his health, and then have the friends come along and say the kinds of things that they said to him. So now, what I'd like to do, you have your handout that's 2 pages. It's on one side and the other. 2 pages on one page. I want to go through this list. I hope you'll take it home with you. How do we comfort the suffering? Well, I didn't put it on the list, but don't do like Job's friends, right? That should be obvious. The first, if you look with me, accept expressions of suffering, pain, and grief without condemning the sufferer. In the 70s, and maybe even up till today, there arose this terrible doctrine of hyperfaith, where you're told, just confess and possess. name it, claim it, blab it, and grab it. Do you know about that? So that if you ever said, I'm not feeling well today, I might have a cold, don't confess that. As if that's going to make the cold go away. Don't confess that. So when someone's complaining, you shouldn't be talking that way. Well, you're not in the situation, so how can you tell me that? And by the way, at the end of the story, we'll get to that, God himself will say to the friends, Job, with all of his complaints, all of his questions, has spoken more truthfully, more correctly than you have in all that you've said. So what greater endorsement about my first point than from God himself? So when someone is complaining, instead of telling them, no, don't confess that or don't say that, it's okay, you can say, to be angry. You have every right to be angry. After all, you've just lost your entire family, so who wouldn't be angry and disappointed? Excuse me for a minute here. So in the quotation you see there is no wavering in God's intent to love us no matter what. And we love and live in a community where love counts. We are at once ourselves and like God. If God is big enough and tough enough to handle Job's complaints, which obviously God was, then who are we to say, don't say that? Next, listen to the sufferer with your heart. Now, that can be difficult because sometimes we come with our minds already made up. We've already decided how we're going to respond. You see in the middle of that, listening with our hearts can actually be risky because it means that we also might suffer with the sufferers. If you had a close friend or a family member hurting, you hurt as well. They notice that. They appreciate that. Even though you certainly didn't volunteer to be a part of the pain, but that's just part of the deal, that you are there to carry the load with them. If Galatians 6:1 and 2 is true, bear you one another's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ, then indeed it is. Our role to be there to suffer with them. Again, look at the quotation there. Keep your eyes on the one who refuses to turn stones into bread, jump from great heights, or rule with great temporal power. What's he referring to? The three temptations of Jesus. Keep your eyes on the one who says, blessed are the poor, the gentle, those who mourn, those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Blessed are the merciful, the peacemakers, and those who are persecuted for the cause of righteousness. Keep your eyes on the one who is poor with the poor, weak with the weak, and rejected with the rejected. That one is the source of all peace. So, Philip Yancey there in the quotation is imploring us, follow the example of Jesus, who certainly suffered ultimately for all of us, with and for us. Then, don't try to fix the pain. I told you last week, people came to us after they heard of our son's autism diagnosis with over-the-counter pills that were going to cure my son's autism, as if that were the case. All that did is make us mad and create distance between those people. I'm sure they meant well, but they weren't understanding the seriousness of our son's condition. They were trying to fix our son's situation. They should have just loved him exactly as he is. Did you know people like my son are created in God's image just like you are? And are loved just like you are? And has gifts to give to the church and to the world just like you do? There's no difference. So then why look down your nose at my son to offer us Shackley vitamins to try to fix him? Maybe we should give you something to fix you. The problem is not my son, it's in you who don't understand how Jesus touched the woman at the well, outcast. Remember? When he used a Samaritan, a hated Samaritan, as a good example of a good guy, a good Samaritan. All right? And then finally, do not desert. Some people feel as though the church has forgotten them, that no one is seeing what we are going through. You heard pastors say at the beginning the importance of building community. And you can't build community if you just spend 30 seconds before and after church greeting someone, or maybe not even that many seconds. You forgive my little editorial right here. This has been the pet peeve of mine since the early 70s. Came into the Assemblies of God in the early 70s in a smaller church, and everyone was loving, embrace, and talk to each other. We used to have altar benches. Any of you remember altar benches? We'd come to the altar, we'd pray, and people would come around and pray with you. We knew each other. We understood the struggles each of us had. People were really concerned. So you go forward slowly through the years, and to my utter dismay, I'd go into an Assemblies of God, and you'd have to hear from the pulpit, be sure and shake your neighbor's hand. What? People have to be told to shake their neighbor's hand? It got to the point where it was so bad, I would go to a particular churches, and attend there for a while, and people would sit next to each other in church week after week, month after month, year after year, not know the name of the person next to them. But they see each week. You know, people have their favorite place in church to sit, right? And so 2 or 3 seats over, here's this one, never actually know each other's name, much less what's going on. So we actually have to be there in their lives first and then not desert them. But we've already deserted them by not being willing to be a part of their life. Any of you connecting with what I'm saying with this? So again, this is why Pastor Stan is trying to get us through small groups or whatever it takes to connect in a way so that you might learn, oh yeah, so-and-so's name is this, and he or she is going through this. And I might not be able to help, but I know somebody in the church who might be able to help. Are you with me on this? So don't desert them, but maybe you've already deserted them by not even knowing who they are. So here's the problem. Being available to people is a time-consuming business, as you see the last paragraph. It's time-consuming because sometimes we have no others to help us with our ministry to the suffering. It's risky because I put our own happiness or personal interests aside for the often dreary job of listening to or helping those who hurt or are grieving. Doesn't mean sacrificing your own family or life. We still have to do our responsibilities, but being available means that we demonstrate real concern for people on an ongoing basis, whatever that might look like. At least they will know. I know I can count on sister so-and-so, brother so-and-so, because this is what they did in my life. Well, let's then look at the next slide and see how God responds to the friends. Are we there? God's rebuke of the friends. Remember, God had a testimony about Job at the beginning. Have you considered my servant Job? And now he has a testimony about the friends. After the Lord had said these things to Job, he said to Eliphaz the Temanite, I'm angry with you and your friends because you have not spoken the truth about me as my servant Job has. And so, as you can see, they have to bring offerings, and the very one they've accused of being unspiritual, guilty of all these great sins, he's the one that has to pray for them. Wow, talk about irony. The tables completely turn. So Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar actually did what the Lord told them to do, and God forgave them. And then in the next slide, you see Job's fortunes are restored. Now, before we look at this, let's remember, we can so easily dismiss all that Job went through to say, well, remember at the end he got everything back. Let me just ask you this question. How would you like to have been one of the first set of kids? You're not so dismissive now, are you? Yeah, he had a family restored, but what about his first family? Anyone who has lost a child knows that that never leaves. That grief never leaves. And you can never forget what you went through in that loss. So, you see, after Job had prayed for his friends, the Lord restored his fortunes and gave him twice as much as he had before. The Lord blessed the latter part of Job's life more than the former part. While we thank God for that, this is not an ironclad guarantee. We should not assume that everything will be hunky and dory after we've gone through some horrible situation. In the roughest times that we went through with our son's condition, and we were questioning like Job was and struggling with our faith, my wife and I still had the sense, somehow, God was there. As I look back on those times, and they were terribly dark, he didn't sleep through the night more than 2 hours at a time for 3.5 years. He was out of control. I mean, his autism was on the severe side of the autism spectrum. And so we were bleary-eyed and zombies for a long time. Where was God? But somehow God was there in the midst of us. God was helping us. When he was diagnosed in February of 1986, February of 1986, I remember exactly where I was. Some of you can remember when JFK was assassinated, the exact place where you were. I can remember the exact place where I was when my wife called me from the neurologist office to tell us of his diagnosis. From that moment of February 1986 through August 1986, I was totally numb. Numb. Why has God done this? I was just reciting prayers. I still had to conduct my classes, still had to have prayer in class and teach the Bible. I was just going through the motions. Where was God? It was just horrible. I was so devastated I couldn't even weep over my son's condition. I didn't tell anyone, and hopefully my students didn't recognize my condition. I didn't let on, but I was hurting. Each fall, the president at the time would have a faculty prayer meeting before the semester would begin. And so as that faculty prayer meeting began, Brother Elliot, began to weep, which was typical for him. But in this case, the Lord spoke in that moment to me and said, "That's for you." And when he finally was able to compose himself, here's all he said. "Oh, how the Fetkes must be hurting." That's all he said. And the floodgates in me opened. I began to weep, and I was so devastated and weeping, sobbing so strongly I could hardly move. From that moment in August 1986 to today, is today March 27th, 2024, never once questioned God again. Even though my son was not cured, his condition, actually as he got older, got worse rather than better. Nevertheless, God was with us all along. Now, why? Somebody interceded for me, for my wife and me. And what a difference that made. I'm wondering here, has God laid on your heart somebody who might be, you suspect, secretly suffering? Have you interceded for that person? What I like to do, I won't do it tonight, but I like to sneak over to somebody and slip shoes off and put them right in the front and ask you, which of you would step into the shoes of that person and pray as if you were that person? Oh, how that person must be hurting. And how would you pray? Are you hearing this? Yes. I'm wondering if I'm going to inspire one of you tonight and the days following to step into someone's shoes you know is truly, truly suffering, so that they hear from you, "I have prayed for you. I have prayed for you. I don't know what you're going through, but I have really prayed for you, and I want to continue." Well, at the bottom of the outline, there is this wonderful prayer that comes from St. Augustine. And you see it? The bottom of your outline says concluding prayer. Are you there? You see it? Can you read it? Is it big enough print that you can read it? Okay. Would you say it out loud with me, please? God of our life, there are days when the burdens we carry chafe our shoulders and weigh us down. When the road seems dreary and endless, the skies gray and threatening, when our lives have no music in them, and our hearts are lonely and our souls have lost their courage, flood the path with light. Run our eyes to where the skies are full of promise. Tune our hearts to brave music. Give us the sense of comradeship with heroes and saints of every age, and so quicken our spirits that we may be able to encourage the souls of all who journey with us on the road of life. To your honor and glory. Amen.